Okay. All right, everybody. The looks like it has slowed down in terms of people joining. I may have to let a few other folks in. I kind of preferred the old-fashioned way where I get to shake your hand at the door, but that's not an option today. Also, we are recording this session, and the purpose of the recording is to, first, I think we are going to post the recordings to the website. But second, we're using it as a method to capture all the questions, including those that get captured verbally. We're also capturing those that are asked in the chat. And we've been working with the group here on a frequently asked questions document that we'll be able to respond to questions that have come up over the last session and this one. So with that, I'm going to get started by first introducing myself. I'm Leldon Langley. I'm the Director of the Division of Watershed Management at MassDEP. I want to welcome you all. Appreciate you attending this second session on CSO notification plan training and templates that we have developed. I'd also like to introduce our staff. I want to give me a second here, allowing more people in. Sean Murphy, who heads our operator training and certification program at MassDEP. Susie King, who is the section chief of our NPDES program. And Kevin Brander, who is the section chief of the Northeast Regional Office wastewater program. We will all be helping in various ways today, taking parts of the agenda as well as helping respond to questions. And for now, I've got everybody on mute just to cut down on unintended noise. So, when we get to the section when we are having verbal discussion and folks want to ask questions verbally, I'll unmute folks and let people do that. So if you have a question, that would be helpful to go ahead and put it in the chat, but you're also welcome to ask them later on verbally if it's too long or if you don't think of it till later or whatever. So I think we wanted to start today by me going over the status of a few of the items that kind of remain outstanding for DEP to do, and then talk about what we're going to spend our time on for the rest of the session. So we have taken the PowerPoint that was used to present at the last session that we held last Friday, and we have posted that to our website. I believe I provided that link to that document in the updated invitation that I sent you earlier in the week. So you can access that PowerPoint presentation there. Some folks had asked for that. We're also going to we're going to post the recording from last week's session and this session to our website. I expect that to be done later today or tomorrow. I'm getting some help with that a little bit later on in the day. And we'll have a lottery. If anybody can guess how many times I say in the last session, you will get a free review of your CSO notification plan. The status of the frequently asked questions. We are preparing those questions that you have asked. We've been working pretty diligently on those. We have a lot of those answers drafted. It's going to need some additional work to complete responding to the questions that you've asked, and probably want to get others within DEP to take a look at that, hoping to get that FAQ finished later next week after we've heard this week's session's questions and added those to the document. There's some other items that I think people might be interested in. The database that folks will be required to enter data into whenever there is a regulated event that occurs. That database is under development. We had another meeting with our IT team yesterday and have been developing the business rules and expect that phase of the database development to be completed pretty soon. And then it would be sent to the people who would do the coding and development. And then we would have an opportunity to sort of test the database, make sure that it's working properly, and sort of see if you can break it, which is what you try to do with any new programs that get developed. So we are still attempting. We will attempt to give folks an opportunity to test that with us. Folks on the outside to have an opportunity to see how that database would look and how it would work. I don't have timing on that yet. That's something that will probably shape out as we get a little further along in the development of the database. Obviously, it needs to be up and running before the July date by which the requirements to enter data and report these events comes to you. So we are still hoping to do that in some number of weeks in advance of that July date. Okay. We had some questions last week regarding translation needs. A couple of those questions, I think we are going to consult with the Director of Environmental Justice group on, and we would expect to be able to answer those questions regarding translation in the FAQ. Also, we are intending to provide some help with translation of the signage that DEP has committed to developing a template for. And speaking of the signage, that is another item that is in DEP's wheelhouse to respond to. We're going to go to work on we have some templates that were drafted for us by Worcester Polytechnic Institute students, and we're going to start taking a closer look at those draft templates and work on preparing that signage here in the next couple of weeks. Finally, we need to provide you with a list of contacts for other state and federal agencies. We've been making good progress on that. I'm glad to report. Have responses, I think, from all of the agencies. There's just a little bit more work to do to finalize those contacts and help the other agencies understand specifically what it is they would need to do. That is particularly true of our colleagues who are at DCR and who are at Fish and Wildlife, who may have control over some of the access points on some of the waterways that can be affected by CSO discharges, and where there might need to be signage under the public access point provisions for signage. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Kevin, if Kevin's ready, and let him talk a bit about SSO events. There was some interest at last week's session in having some further explanation of SSO events that are regulated under this set of regulations. Kevin?
All right. Thanks, Leldon. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, good. Okay. Yes. I'm going to try to share my screen, Leldon. Not that I have anything high tech here, but I just kind of carved out and pasted a few of the highlights of the SSO piece. So I'm going to give that a shot. You need to let me have a go at that, Leldon, or whoever.
Yeah, sorry. Give me one more minute. I'm trying to find that button.
So I'll start out, I guess, by saying that, in many ways, people kind of deem this to be a CSO reporting law, but the law did not single out CSOs. It talked about discharges, wastewater discharges. So, there are some SSOs that we've included for notifications. We've tried to be kind of judicious in making that determination. And singling out those that are either required by the Act or otherwise are the ones that would likely to have the most public health impact. So, and I'm just going to summarize.
Kevin, you should have the ability to share your screen now.
Okay. And let me know, you guys see that?
We can see it. It's kind of small, at least for my eyes. So if you can enlarge it at all.
I'll give that a shot, Alden. Is that better? How's that? Better?
Looks good.
A little bit?
Thank you.
Okay, so there are basically three types of SSO events that are going to require public advisory notifications. The first one, SSOs that occur through a wastewater outfall. We did get an inquiry on this, and it is odd to have an SSO event discharged through a wastewater outfall because it's very uncommon to have designed SSO relief points. But what we do have in some cases, we have CSO outfalls that also serve jointly as a storm drain outfall. So in those cases, if you were to have an SSO that got into the storm drain system that discharged from what's identified as a CSO outfall, that falls within the purview of this discharge through an outfall. So this item number C is really directly related to the text of the law that was passed. We don't expect this to be a common event. We expect most SSOs from collection systems to emerge from manholes, wet wells, maybe in the case of pump stations or infrastructure like that. But they are named in the legislation. Items D and E are kind of what I mentioned earlier. We feel like these are the events that we've seen from historical experience to have the most significant public health risk. The first of those is the result of SSOs, which occur when generally only during wet weather events where there's no capacity of the collection system or the interceptor system to convey flows to the treatment works. We've seen in those cases that some of these SSO events rival the CSOs for larger events in terms of volume and duration. So those would also be required to file a public advisory notification. And lastly, any SSO that comes as a result of a failure of a pump station designed to convey 1 million gallons a day or more. And that would include either a failure at the pump station or a break in the force main. And that's something we've seen actually more so. I'd say in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of very significant force main breaks. They can be very large discharges and occur in some cases over a sustained period. So D and E are the kind of ones that certainly E, even probably more so, are the ones that can have fairly significant public health impacts in a very short term right off the bat. So those are the three types of SSO events. There's also a discovery component that's in the regulations. And basically what it says is that a permittee would have 4 hours from the time either they get like a pump station alarm or an independent notification of a 4-hour independent notification of an SSO event or some manner of report that suggests that an SSO is occurring. And so they would have 4 hours to undertake some manner of investigation or site inspection or meter evaluation or pump station alarm. Some pump stations have data systems or SCADA systems. So that's the intent of the discovery, is in that 4 hours that attempts would be made to confirm or not that there's actually been an event. We've heard comments that that's a short period. Those comments were weighed against the public health risks of the magnitude of the events that we were talking about. So that's what the reg includes now, is this 4-hour event. So we had 4 hours to discover, and after that 4 hours, 2 hours to provide public advisory notification if the SSO event falls into one of those three categories.
Thank you, Kevin. Kevin, there's a couple of questions that we've got that pertain to this subject. So I'm going to read you the first one that's in the chat from Amy. It says, so discharge, quote, through a wastewater outfall, end quote, could mean an SSO discharge that enters a drain, which discharges downstream of a regulator. Is that correct?
That's correct, because the outfall point itself is designed for a discharge of wastewater, namely a CSO. And even though the event would not be a CSO event, the outfall would be designed for that purpose.
Okay, thanks. And then Josh Schimmel has his hand up. I'm going to give Josh, I'm going to unmute Josh, let him ask his question. Josh, I've asked you to unmute. If you can control that, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Gotcha. Thanks, Loudon. Kevin, just want to either point something out, and I don't want to complicate it for any of us, but I do want to point out that if you can scroll back to D&E there,
yep.
You know, we're going to have scenarios where we have a small lift station that fails, because they fail a lot more than do our larger pumping stations, and that's just a reality. And so we're still going to be reporting an SSO to you guys because it's going to fail and somehow make its way into a water body or out of a system. And we're not going to report that in the notification, and we are going to report it in every other format that we already do. But I think you're undervaluing the impacts, because I can tell you when our larger pump stations fail, they're on the larger bodies of water, and 100,000 gallons into the Connecticut River is a drop in the bucket. But 30, 40, 50,000 gallons over a period of time in these smaller streams is far more impactful. And so I just think you're missing it a little bit here. Not that I want to have to report more, but you're now going to have a discrepancy in what we report to you in each year in terms of SSOs, and then what is being publicly reported, and that usually comes back on us. So, right, people are going to look at the annual report and how many SSOs, and it's not going to match with what is compiled and put onto your clearinghouse website, because we will have more potentially on what is reported through our regular programming than what you're reporting, because you're excluding pump stations that fail that are less than 1 million gallons for the notification. So there'll be a discrepancy between the notifications and the actual reporting. I just want to point that out to you. And I don't know how it is for others, but our pump station failures, it's the small lift stations. It's not the, you know, the big ones go occasionally, but that's once every 5-10 years. The little ones are more frequent and sometimes more impactful because it's smaller streams with less dilution. I just wanted to point that out as something that could come back and bite us all later.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Josh. And I think there's nothing that would preclude a permittee from providing notification for events even outside this, if they feel that there's public health risk to it. And the other thing I would say is about the pump stations is that, yeah, I think there's a lot more issues at some smaller pump stations, but on our end, what we've seen in a lot of cases is they're more easily managed, you know, that there's pumper trucks, backup power, some manner of things that you don't have an event that may last literally, you know, 5-6 days in some cases. So I get your point, and I think it's a good one, is that there's going to be some events that may have public health impacts that are that don't fit into these boxes. And I guess it would be the discretion of the permittee if they wanted to, you know, advance the notification program beyond just letting EPA and DEP know.
Okay, Kevin, thank you. If anyone else has a question that pertains to this particular subject, if you want to ask it now, just raise your hand. It's a little hard for me to monitor, you know, everybody since it's a pretty large group, but raise your hand and that'll give me a signal that you have a question related to this. Yes, I see a question. I'm going to ask you to unmute. You got your hand raised, Mr. Demary, and feel free to go ahead and ask your question if you can unmute yourself. You did.
Yes, my question is, how long after event occurs do you have to update it on to the central website that you're developing?
I'm sorry, I missed part of the question.
So you have an event, a CSO event or an SSO event, and you put out your public notifications and you do all your local stuff. How much time do we have after that to put it on the DEP database website?
So my understanding is for those, and I'm going to unmute my DEP colleagues and let them pipe in if they need to. So my understanding is that the discovery and the posting for into the DEP website for 24-hour, 24/7 facilities is 2 hours, and for sorry, John, I've asked you to, I've given you the ability to unmute. This is a nuisance. And Susie, I'm going to do the same for you here as soon as I can find your name in the list. And that for those other facilities that is a 4-hour window. You guys have the ability to unmute now if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, so the discovery timeline is what's 2 or 4 hours based on the size of the facility for a CSO. In terms of the reporting into our database, it's the same timeline as when you have to do the notification, so 2 hours
Okay.
from discovery, 2 hours from discovery.
Okay, one thing I want to mention about that is that a lot of communities will be investing in technology to automate this process. But I don't see how the process of updating the DEP website can ever be automated. That requires a person to go to the website and to manually enter data. Am I correct?
So yes, a person would have to enter the data into the our system manually, and then it's supposed to be set up so that it will automatically go onto our website once the permittee submits it.
Okay, so I think you see the issue there, that if people spend all this money on technology to automate so that at 2 o'clock in the morning, they don't have to call in personnel, they're going to have to call in personnel anyways to even if the public notifications go out, the local website's updated, blah, blah, blah. They have to manually enter the data in the DEP website. And if it has to be done simultaneously, the question is, why do you have the local websites if you have the DEP central website?
So a couple responses. I mean, my understanding is a person is still going to have to manually enter information in order for the notification to go out, because there's information that's specific to that event. So a person would still, in the absence of the reporting to DEP, they would still have to, a human still has to enter some information in order for the public advisory notification to go out, because you need to be able to say the location and the estimated volume and all that.
Well, I think that the communities, the larger CSO communities are trying to automate that as much as possible for that reason, to reduce the need to call in manpower for that specific reason. But it seems like it would go for naught if you have to manually enter it in the DEP website. But could you address that issue? Why does every community have to have a website if the DEP website has to be updated at the same frequency?
So the answer to that question is that the statute requires that each permittee maintains a website for this. So we couldn't really get out of that with just the DEP website. I understand that's a challenge, but we are unfortunately bound by statute language.
Yeah, I understand that, but I think this is going to increase the costs, to the communities. The automated websites are probably like 25 grand just to get in the ball game, plus 15 or 20 a year for maintenance. Now you're talking all the overtime of personnel. I think you really should keep track of this costs to see, is there a cost of, what it is to the communities. It's a lot of money, tremendous amount of money.
You know, Mickey, if you don't mind, I'll jump in. This was the point that I brought up at the last meeting, is that as you guys develop the architecture of your website and your clearinghouse, we need to be involved, because people are absolutely going to be automating this process, 100%. That is what everybody who can has the resources to do it will, because it will cost you significantly more to do it with man and women power. And so the process is going to be automated, and this is a hitch in it that could be addressed with technology, with automatically being able to upload certain data if we could work together on it. And I brought it up at the last meeting because exactly what Mickey is saying is uploading that data with a person is not effective for any of us, or for many of us who are going to approach this differently. You know, if you're not staffed 24/7, 365 in your collection system, and you already have some automation and metering and monitoring, you're going to take the steps and investment to automate this so that you're not bringing people in specifically. So, I think there needs to be a little more on DEP's part to help open up the architecture of that, so there can be automation in how that can be uploaded to your site. I don't think it's fair for you to just slam the door and say, no, thank you. I asked it last time, and that architecture is critically important. We're being asked to develop this stuff as well. You guys need to open up the doors here and help us out. You can't just dump it in our laps and walk away.
Hey, Josh, this is Logan. Can I just respond to that? So
Yeah, please.
So I did, thank you for the comment, by the way. It is a serious concern. I appreciate that, you guys made this point again. I did say earlier in the conversation that, we are planning to have an opportunity for folks to respond or have an opportunity to review the data system. We met internally yesterday with our IT department, and I met with senior leaders at DEP yesterday, and it is our intention to give you guys an opportunity to review. Unfortunately, I can't invite you into that process at this particular stage in time. I don't personally have kind of authority over that. It's not a program that is housed within DEP. So we're actually working with, the executive office on this, and they have certain ways that they do things. And we're kind of, also at the mercy of that particular process in developing the business rules. We will move into the next phase pretty soon, which is the coding and then the development of it. And, like I said, it is our intention. In the meantime, I will give this comment over to our IT department so that they can, consider it. And, if we need more info, we'll get back to you guys. But for right now, I'll pass it along to them. We're meeting with them again next week. And so that we'll get that info to them just as quickly as we can. And then, Wendy, you've had your hand up. I've given you the ability to speak. If you can unmute, go ahead and ask your question. Wendy, if you're able to unmute, let me see if I can try that again.
All right, sorry, I had myself on two computers, and you
Okay.
unmuted the one that I can't talk on. So sorry. So I actually, this kind of goes counter to the point I was going to make, which is I'm sure there is technology that will allow this to be done. I just want to reiterate, what these other people were saying. That is, yes, there should be a way. Both, and we had made a comment about being able to upload files rather than hand data entry. As we can, like with NetDMR, there's if everybody uses it, but if you're like us and you have like 6 pages of data to enter into the little tiny boxes, for the DMR, then we upload a file. But also that process should be able to be automated with web services. It's not, there's security issues that need to be worked around, but I'm sure people there's a way to do it, and I think it is important that in order to allow the automation, as is done in, there are people in other parts of the country that are doing this, and I'm sure they have a way of pushing data out
And do you know,
automatically.
Wendy, sorry, I was going to ask a follow-up question to your comment, which is, you mentioned other states that are doing this. Of course, there's, Vermont, New York. Do you have a specific suggestion so that if, when we get this to IT, if they want to take a look at that or talk to somebody or figure out how they're actually doing that, that we could go to that place and and work on that?
I don't off the top of my head, maybe other people know, but I think it may be being done in the Great Lakes, but I may be wrong about that.
Okay.
Or
right.
maybe we're at the cutting edge. We're at the bleeding edge as far as sending out notifications and also pushing to a centralized database. But
Oops. Wendy, I'm sorry. I accidentally cut you off. If you can unmute yourself again.
oh, okay, there we go. Yeah, sorry. So even if there's not an example for CSO notifications, there may be examples, for example, transmitting public health data to central databases and so forth, where the process can be automated, or using web services to automatically, your computer goes out and picks up a file off a server. I think it's probably doable, and it would be important to pay attention to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Listen, folks, this muting and unmuting folks is kind of a nuisance. So now that we're all settled and, there's no sort of extraneous noise from, people getting settled, I'm going to give everybody the ability to unmute themselves. So if you do have a verbal question, first, please raise your hand. I'll call on you, but you should have the ability to just go ahead and unmute and ask that question. So I see Andrew Mai has his hand up. And you're welcome to ask your question. Andrew, I've asked you to unmute, so that might give you that. Hopefully you're off now. Good. Andrew, you've got the floor, and it looks like you're unmuted on my end, but I can't tell. You might have a mute on your end.
Hello. Okay, there you go. Technology issues. So I'm just piggybacking off of Josh and Mickey's comment. So still just thinking out loud, the solution for, since the MassDEP database is going to host all this info, and then I know there's extra information, as Susie mentioned, that goes with the notification. Is there some solution or possibility that, because there'll be extra fields in the MassDEP database, we can just host our extra information that we can also post there? And I know we're at the mercy of having our own website, but maybe the website can just have our specific info and then link to the MassDEP database with everything else. So I have two questions. That's my first one.
Okay, anybody in the DEP group want to take a
I'm not
run
sure I
at that?
quite understood what you were asking, whether we could put additional information on our website that is required to be on the permittee website. Can you clarify?
Yeah, so let's speak a little bit more specifically. So the public website needs to have the notifications, updates, instructions to subscribe, level of treatment, any other compiled data at the end of the month. So, I mean, what I was thinking is if the site has a basic website that has like the map, long-term control plan, but for any other information that goes with the notifications, could there be extra fields in the database to just host that information?
Like a comment field, you mean, Andrew?
Yeah, to kind of minimize the manpower that goes with that.
So you mean like the additional information, like the treatment provided, things like that, like put that into the DEP data system rather than put it on the permittee's website? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, as an example. Yep.
I don't think there's anything that would stop us from putting that into our data system as fields for people to enter. But I don't know if legally it meets what's in the regulations in terms of it's supposed to be on the permittee's website. So we'd have to take a closer look at that. I'm not trying to say no for sure, but I can't say yes for sure either.
Right. So if the language says specifically like this should be on the permittee's website, then that's what it is. Okay. Okay, and my second question, I popped it in the chat, but can we get some clarification on the website requirements for the SSO systems, or I should say the non-CSO systems? So the CMR itself has a list of a minimum for CSO system websites, but then the section before it says more generally that a permittee should have a website.
So any permittee, whether they're CSO or non-CSO, has to have a website where they can post notifications, and then that additional information like level of treatment and a place to subscribe and all of that. And then, yeah, there's additional requirements for the CSO permittees, which is in that separate section at 1605(1). So I think the way you characterize it in the chat, I think is correct. Everything that's not mentioned in 1605(1) that's related to the website would apply to the non-CSO systems.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. Susie, let me keep you on the hook here if you don't mind. Luchika has a question that she put in the chat, and I think you did try to address this, but I just want to make sure we cover it. So does the statute require the MassDEP website be updated in the same time frame?
It requires that the MassDEP website is updated 24 hours after we receive the information from the permittee. I just double checked that because I saw that question.
So, Susie, thank you. I guess I'm still not, so there's no leeway for us updating our websites in those timeframes, but kind of piggybacking on previous comments about automating the notifications and the human power needed to send those updates to you. Can those updates to you be given, let's say, the next day if the event happens in the middle of the night, and then you have 24 hours from when you get it from us to update your website? Or does it have to be in that, 2+2 or 2+4 hours that you get the notification, like that clearinghouse update from the permittees?
Right, so it's the statute that puts that requirement on the 24-hour for us to update the website 24 hours after we receive the data. But the way we wrote the regulations, that inputting into our data system is required in the same time frame as the notification. So that 2 hours, unless you had an extension on the 2 hours. Theoretically, we could have written the regulations differently, but I honestly can't change how they are now, right? I think people are raising some good points that, we're kind of there's only so much flexibility at this point. And we certainly hear what you're saying about, the difficulty of not being able to automate that. And we will talk to the IT folks to see what options there are to try to minimize the effort. I don't think we can make any promises today without sort of knowing the capabilities that we might have available. But we definitely hear what everyone's saying about this issue.
Okay, Andrew, you still had, I'm sorry, Luchika, go ahead. if you were adding to your question, go ahead, please.
I was just saying thank you for clarifying.
All right, you're welcome. Okay, good. I think what I'd like to do is go on to some other topics, and then we'll circle back to the questions that are in the chat. So next on our agenda, last week's session, we were asked to talk a bit about Board of Health responsibilities, and Susie was going to cover that today. So let's take some time to speak to that, and we'll take questions relevant to that particular topic, and then we'll continue on with other parts of the template that we want to talk about as well.
Okay, sure. I'm just gonna run through the requirements that the regulations established for municipal boards of health and health departments. And for ease of speaking, I'm gonna just refer to them as boards of health, but also inclusive of health departments where that's the body that municipality uses. So the statute required MassDEP to consult with the Department of Public Health in developing the standards for boards of health to issue public health warnings. And we did consult with them in preparing the draft regulations, and as we developed the final regulations, considering the comments received, public comments received during the public comment period. All the requirements for boards of health are in 314 CMR 16.09. And so permittees are responsible for identifying the municipalities that are affected by their discharges and overflows, and then notifying those municipalities' boards of health when the discharges or overflows occur. So they would be included in your list of entities that gets the notification. So once the Board of Health receives the notification, they are responsible for issuing a public health warning if one of two situations exists. So if the notification is for any SSO that requires notification under 314 CMR 16, then regardless of the duration or volume or any of that, then they have to issue the public health warning. If the notification is for a CSO, a partially treated wastewater, or a blended wastewater discharge that exceeds 2 hours in duration, then they would have to issue a public health warning. Additionally, the boards of health have the flexibility to issue a public health warning for CSO, partially treated, or blended discharge that's less than 2 hours in duration, if they determine that it's necessary to issue that warning to protect public health. And that's their decision to do that if they wish to do that. So once they've established if they are issuing public health warning, they have to do that using their existing emergency notification systems, which includes, if available, a reverse 911 emergency call system. If it's a situation where you can have more than one discharge or overflow to one water body, the Board of Health can determine whether they need more than one public health warning. So if there's a CSO that discharges and the Board of Health issues a public health warning then, and 2 hours later, another CSO to the same water body starts discharging, it's up to the Board of Health to determine we need to issue a second public health warning, or no, we think the first one was fine, it was enough, and we don't need to issue another one because we think it's sufficiently protective to just have the first one. There is specific information that has to be included in the public health warning. It's the receiving waters that are affected, the location, date, and time of the discharge or overflow, a recommendation that the public avoid contact with affected water bodies for at least 48 hours after a sewage discharge or overflow, and during rainstorms, and for 48 hours after rainstorms end. And they have to provide information on where to find the closure or advisory status of shellfish growing areas, beaches, or other water resource areas potentially affected by the discharge, and then access to translations of the warning as appropriate for neighborhoods identified as EJ populations due to lacking English language proficiency. So that could be a link to a website where the translation is provided, or doesn't necessarily have to be the message itself is fully translated. And just a note on the information about where to find the closure or advisory status. We included that because we wanted to make sure if there's a situation where there's a CSO discharge, but a beach doesn't need to be closed because it from the DPH regulations, it's meeting all of its water quality parameters. We don't want people to assume it's closed if it's actually could be usable because that location wasn't specifically affected. So that was a change from in the final regulations. And then the other piece of this is related to signage. So when the Board of Health issues a public health warning, they have to either post a temporary sign or use a permanent sign that already exists at conspicuous locations affording public access to the water body. And it's up to the Board of Health to determine those locations. The permanent signs that CSO permittees are installing at public access points can be used for this purpose if the Board of Health and permittee are able to work that out to make that happen. Temporary signage is not required at permitted bathing beaches or shellfish growing areas that are already monitored and posted from DPH or the Division of Marine Fisheries. So if the temporary sign is used, there's some specific things it has to include. It needs to say, warning, avoid contact with water, may cause illness. It has to display an infographic that shows no fishing, boating, or swimming. And then if there's a need for translation based on EJ populations due to lacking English language proficiency, that statement that I just read, warning, avoid contact with water, may cause illness, that has to be translated on the sign. But then there's other information that has to be provided on the sign, and the sign could just have that in English with then a link to a translation elsewhere. And that additional information is an explanation that the reason for the warning is to inform people about potential for sewage in the water. Some information that has to be required in the notifications, where to find information about closure status of shellfish beds or beaches, and contact information for the Board of Health or Health Department. So if there is a permanent sign at the location that's installed by the permittee, the Health Department, or any other party, it could be used for that purpose if it has the ability to be updated with information in a timely manner, and it has to be able to convey that same information as the temporary sign. I think we recognize this maybe one of the more challenging pieces to work out between the permittee and the Board of Health. We haven't specified exactly what it means to have a sign that can be updated with timely information. We're open to different options that the permittee and the Board of Health may come up with. Some things we've thought of is some kind of flashing light. So the sign would have text that alerts you that if the light is flashing, that means a discharge is occurring. I think somebody mentioned in last week's training, could there be like a panel that you flip that says there's a discharge occurring? Yes, that sounds reasonable as long as it can convey the information that has to be conveyed. Some entities may choose to have a sign that has a blank space, and the Board of Health comes and staples a piece of paper to that when there's a discharge. So we're open to different ideas for how that gets accomplished, as long as it can convey the necessary information.
And Susie, there's a question in the chat relevant to this topic. It says, are the public health warnings in addition to the emails that we send out to the list of people who ask to be notified?
So yes, but to different people. So the permittee is sending out their public advisory notification to the entities that are listed in the regulations that have to be notified, as well as anybody who subscribes. The Board of Health is doing the public health warning, and they're sending it out to their residents only. There's no ability to subscribe for public health warnings. It would be using the Board of Health's existing list, whatever they would use for emergency notifications.
And that includes reverse 911 if available, right?
Right. And surely there's going to be some overlap between those two, but they're different lists and different ways that they're issued.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Demary?
Yes. This is Mickey Nowak. I'm sharing the screen with Ashley.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So that area where it says the Board of Health will or will cause to be posted, can I interpret that is they would say, hey, you put up the sign, you know, are we then responsible? What does
So
that mean?
yeah, I think that's in there to allow the flexibility that they could have someone else post a sign other than them. But I don't think a board of, well, so it depends. I don't, if it's within the same town, I'm not sure, but if it's a downstream board of health, they don't have the authority to make an upstream permittee post a sign. So I think if you're within the same town, maybe the same, you know, same municipal government, maybe that might be something that is worked out between the entities, but I don't think a board of health in a different municipality could require the permittee to post a temporary sign. If they work out an agreement between themselves to do that, that's fine. I think it's just to allow that if the Board of Health can find a way for somebody else to post it, it would be acceptable to meet the requirement.
Okay, so what about a downstream, you report to a downstream Board of Health, okay? You say, hey, we had this overflow. Do we have to supply the signs or do they have to supply the signs?
So the permittee for a CSO, permittee already is having to supply a permanent sign at these public access points.
Okay, but no, I'm talking in another community downstream.
Right, yes, which includes
Okay.
downstream communities.
Yeah.
So Lowell, Lawrence, Haverhill may have to install permanent signs at public access points in communities downstream of them that are not within their municipality. In terms of how the Board of Health in those communities fulfills this sort of temporary sign requirement, it's going to have to be worked out between the Board of Health and the permittee. But if the Board of Health says, I want to do a temporary sign, I don't want to try to modify this permanent sign, then they take the responsibility for that. They post a temporary sign. It's not the permittee's responsibility to post a temporary sign unless they reach some agreement that that's how they're going to do it.
Have you had any feedback from any Board of Health people on this issue? It sounds like there's going to be a lot of this, you know, pointing at each other.
We did get comments during the public comment period that, you know, that influenced some of these changes. And we are going to be doing a presentation for boards of health in March. So I'm sure
I'm thinking of boards of health in small towns. It usually consists of one person. It sounds like a lot of responsibility for them to be out there posting signs at whatever hours of the morning, if there's like a one-person part-time Board of Health. Just a comment, not a question.
we are aware that that is a concern.
Yes, we've been made aware. There's a couple, just one thing I want to add to this too, is that, you know, there's some other players that aren't sort of involved in this call today, but I can tell you that Leldon and I spoke to, in DCR's division, the Office of Fishing and Boating Access, and they kind of regulate or oversee 300 access points to surface waters. And, you know, they don't have obligations under the law or these regulations, but I think this is going to work most efficiently if there's some collaboration between, you know, a bunch of parties, not just the permittees and the boards of health, but maybe people like them or the managers at some of these specific facilities that may be impacted. So I think we get it. This is a very challenging piece. You know, a lot of it has been said with other pieces of this is that, you know, the legislation had very strong wording in this regard. And you know, there was consultation with DPH. There was a lot of factors involved. And yes, we know this is going to be challenging.
Is there a time limit for the Board of Health to post the signs?
There isn't.
No, okay.
Okay. Just for anybody who joined late, I want to just remind folks that the session's being recorded. We're going to post the recording, and we're also going to use the recording to be able to, you know, capture these kinds of questions and discussion that's occurring and make sure that we're able to respond to everything. So I just wanted to mention that again. And Catherine Woodbury, I see your hand is up. You're welcome to ask your question.
Hi, I think the question was just answered because one of the requirements for issuing a public health warning is if a CSO has been discharging for 2 hours or longer. And in many cases, boards of health aren't going to know that until the community sends out that update 8 hours later saying that the CSO has ceased and how long that has occurred, because is that right? I mean, so you just said, Susie, that there isn't a timeline for the Board of Health to post that signage, right?
Right. So I think the thinking is you have to send your notification within 2 hours of discovery of the event. And when you do your notification, if the discharge has already ceased, the notification should say that. So if the Board of Health gets a notification that there was a discharge, but it's already stopped, then they know that they don't have to issue the public health warning unless they want to, because they think there's still a risk to public health. But I do think, yeah, there will be some challenges where maybe a permittee doesn't take the full 2 hours to issue the notification. It only started an hour, the event only started an hour ago. So does the Board of Health have to issue or not? They would have to wait, I think, and find out at that 8 hour mark whether, when it stopped.
Okay, and then regarding the posting of signs in downstream communities, I understood from the last presentation that communities weren't required to post signs in other communities, only within their own municipality or jurisdiction. But you just said there were some entities that would be required to post the public access points outside of their own communities. Is that right?
Yes, so the permanent signs that the CSO permittees have to install are at public access points affected by their discharge. And there's nothing that states that it's only within their municipality. Different from the temporary signs that are required associated with the public health warning, that is the responsibility of the Board of Health in that community. But the signs for CSO dischargers at public access points could be outside of the discharger's municipality if it's found that the access points are affected by their, potentially affected by their discharges.
And Catherine, you might be recalling that the question was asked by one of the permittees on the Connecticut River if they had to post in the state of Connecticut if their discharge was going to affect a community in Connecticut, and the answer to that question was no. So we were respecting, state boundaries there for that question, but that might have confused the issue a bit.
Okay, well, yes, I did remember that. So if there are downstream communities that are impacted by multiple communities or agency CSOs, for instance, on the Alewife Brook, there's Somerville, Cambridge, and MWRA who might have impact on downstream communities that are the same. We're not all required to put 3 different signs at a public access point. Can there be joint signs?
Yeah, so we don't expect there to be 3 different signs. I would say the dischargers and the boards of health in those affected communities should try to work that out, whether it's sharing the cost of the signs or, if you know that there needs to be 3 different signs, and there's 3 different dischargers, each discharger is going to take responsibility for 1 sign, whatever works for those entities. We certainly don't expect 3 signs at each public access point. That just doesn't make sense.
And I think this gets to what Kevin was saying earlier. You recognize that there's a lot of different agencies involved in these public access points. One of which is DCR, and a lot of these locations will be on their land, and installing any type of permanent signage. And then if it has to be electrified, that you have to get conduit to those. That's just one more challenge. But all right, thank you.
Right, and we acknowledge, there are some challenges there. We're having conversations with those agencies to try to help them understand what the requirements are and help with, with the postings that would occur on these state properties. Okay, so if we've sufficiently covered boards of health now, the next part of the agenda that I'd like to turn to is the review of the template. We distributed the template, and we're hoping, I know last week when we distributed the template, there wasn't a lot of time to have reviewed it. Wondering if folks have had an opportunity to review it now. And in that review, did you have questions? John, do you want to display the template so we can kind of use it as a foil to for people to ask questions if they have them, and then we can just scroll through.
Yep.
Let me just make sure you've got ability to share your screen. You do. Good.
Yeah, so the goal in developing this template is kind of multifold, but the important part of it is trying to make sure permittees are submitting consistent reports. The regions reviewing these reports, that each document being submitted is going to be consistent to them, so they're reviewing similar documents. We want to make sure that all the permittees are acknowledging all the requirements in the regulations, and then also being able to meet those minimum components established. And if you're unable to meet these components at this initial preliminary submittal, what improvements need to be made. So it's meant to be straightforward. So we'll kind of walk our way through it. The beginning part is pretty straightforward. We're basically just asking for facility information, what you're submitting, who are you submitting for. So that flows pretty straightforward. The EJ populations, environmental justice populations, just making sure you're aware, going through the maps, acknowledging where or if any of environmental justice populations are being impacted. So it's going to walk you through these steps pretty straightforward. Where the required translations needed and some information on that. I think everyone is kind of aware now at this point on what or when public notifications are required. So, when using this document, it's basically going to force you at this point to acknowledge, yes, we are aware of all the different scenarios that require a public notification. Failure to do this is going to direct into a failure of your denial of your submittal. So there's the necessary components that need to be acknowledged, so that the content that needs to go out in the notification, everyone is aware of that, what needs to go in the plan. So again, the permittee is going to need to sign off on that. I saw a question in the chat about not being able to meet timelines. So in section 4, as you see, it kind of lays out discovery of all the events, but I'm going to get to the bottom of that because it has some information I think will be helpful. So, yes. So, can the permittee discover the event within the required timelines? Yes or no? If you're unable to meet these timeline requirements, there is the ability for an extension. And so, in this preliminary plan submittal, you're able to not discover these within the time frame for whatever reason it could be, staffing, logistically, whatever it is. You have the ability to request an extension, and that is through a commissioner's approval. So, if the proposed method of the current discharge detecting capabilities of the permittee's outfill will not provide timely, reliable information, the time for permittee to issue a public advisory notification may be extended by commissioner approval, provided that such time shall not be extended over 24 hours after discovery. So, in this initial submittal, we're also, as we're looking to see what components of this plan can be met and will be met, there is also the understanding that everything may not be in place at the initial outset. So what improvements will need to be made? So again, there's the ability here to request the extension due to any sort of logistical limitation. So, it goes through, are you able to issue your public notification within the time frame? Are you able to meet the cessation, the continuation notifications? So most of the stuff I covered last week, this has all just kind of been laid out in a somewhat straightforward format that the permittee will be able to go through, and it kind of has an assessment tool too, as you go through it now in the preliminary stages. Where are some of the limitations, or what are the areas that are able to be met within the requirements and the regulations? So again, we covered all this earlier, the website, signage. So you'll be signing off with this form on the different areas, making sure you're able to meet all the requirements in the website, meet all the requirements in the signage. So we basically kind of chopped up the regulations and laid them out in a format that the permittee and the regions will be able to use when reviewing. So there were some questions about news outlets that came in early from Upper Blackstone. I think those were good. I think those are questions we can do a little more research on and report back on. So I don't think we have the answer today on those, but it's helpful as these questions come in, or as you start doing some of this research, when you see some of the difficulties, with who at the news, source should be receiving these. Those are important to pass along to us, so we can kind of work on some clarifications and work on that in the Q&A document or the FAQ document. As we kind of talked about, this contact list is being updated. And then basically at a completion to this, you're basically signing off and attesting to this information being to the most up-to-date and to the best of their knowledge, and it's signed off on. So again, we tried to lay this out as straightforward as possible. The goal of it is obviously to keep things as consistent as possible, just so these submittals all flow similarly. So with that being said, I don't know if everyone's had time to review this. If anyone has any specific questions or anything that needs more information, we'd be happy to take that. I see some questions in the chat. I can pull those up.
John, Betsy's got a question. Must
Yep.
the template be used, or can a version be created by each utility? Would the attestation be required in those?
Yeah, so I would say yes, this template must be used. I don't think we're looking for someone to create a separate version. There is the understanding that there are going to be attachments. The final version of this potentially is an online submittal. So I would say yes, the template must be used.
Right, and
But-
to just embellish the point John made about, in the preliminary plan, the goal here is to make sure that facilities are able to meet the minimum requirements to be able to comply with the obligations that take effect in July. When we get into the requirements for the final plan, and we haven't drafted those yet, we don't have, a template for that yet. But the goal there is a little bit different, because it's going to have you describe in some more detail some of the practices and procedures of the permittees, and more specifically, the types of systems that detect activation and measure flow when an outfall is activated. So we do expect, as John said, we expect those to be more particular to individual systems, and that there may be already memorandums, standard operating procedures, or consulting documents that are available that you could provide to detail how some of those practices occur at your particular facility. Typically, when DEP has a submittal that occurs online like this, it gives you the ability to enter in through the eDEP portal. I'm not sure if this is going to be located there or not, but we will try and set up a companion that would be able to accept those attachments separately, so that we can review those as well. Are there other questions?
Yeah, there was another
Go ahead,
question
John.
about, I think it was Siobhan who submitted a question on emailing 3 news organizations and one requiring a paid ad. I just wanted to kind of emphasize this point here. So the requirements of the permittee are to issue to send these notifications to the identified news organizations. You're not required to place ads. You're not responsible for the news organization publishing or any of this information related to it. Once this information is conveyed to the news source, that's kind of the end of the obligation for the permittee. So I would make sure you don't get into a situation that is going to require payment. It's just that the news organization needs to be notified. Ashley, I see you have a question.
Yeah, Mickey Nowak here. Again, I'm sharing the screen with Ashley. On page 3, and it's under the required content for public advisory notifications. And it's the third bullet down, where it says estimated volume of discharge or overflow.
Yes.
Okay, you want to get to that?
Yep, 1 second.
Okay, take.
There you go.
Okay, so you now, this seems to be a change of course here, where you're asking us not only to post the average of the last 3 years, but then correlate it to a certain rain amount. And that seems to be something new that we didn't see. I didn't see that in the regulation.
Yeah, so that might be, what we're looking for in the preliminary plan is, how you're going to calculate that estimated volume.
Okay.
And the long-term view, eventually this number gets correlated to an event or flow in the river or to the discharge. But I think on the initial onset of this is we want to see how the permittee is going to estimate that calculated volume, and that will be sufficient. As the program evolves, with the understanding that this initial start of the program isn't the end of the program. At some point, yes, there probably will be correlations with data and events, but at onset, we're looking to see how the permittee is going to estimate this volume.
Okay, well, we want to go back the last 3 years and say CSO 17, it had 56 activations, it had 528,000 gallons of overflow, it comes out to 14,000 gallons per event. Okay. Yep. To correlate it to rain with multiple rain gauges all across the city, that sounds like a bridge too far initially, but that's our plan there. But my question then from this is, for the estimated volume, can you point to the website, our public notification website, where we post the CSO data for the last 3 years? Is that sufficient?
So if I understand you correctly, I would say that in your initial notification that goes out, that 14,000 gallon calculation would be what would go out in the public advisory notification. And then I think on your website, you may use a different number, a more accurate number as that data comes in.
Okay.
So.
Okay. But so we couldn't just point to our last 3 years data there. You would want some actual number there for estimated volume.
Yep. So that the notification needs to go out with an estimated volume.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, are there other questions on the template?
There's a question in the chat related to the language and EJ stuff.
Yeah, so let me see if I can scroll up there too.
I can at least partially answer that.
Yeah, go ahead, Susie, why don't you start?
So I'll just read the question from Phil Guerin. Section 2 of the template on EJ communities focuses just on English proficiency EJ. The law and regs seem to include all EJ communities, English proficiency, minority, income. Are we only concerned with the eligible proficiency, English proficiency EJ communities relative to signage, website content, public notification? So in terms of translations, it's only required if there's affected EJ communities that are EJ communities due to lacking English language proficiency. So if there's and this is for translation. So if there's a EJ community downstream that's potentially affected by your discharge, but it's only EJ because of minority, or it's only EJ because of income, there would not be a translation requirement triggered. In terms of the requirement to report to a news or to give the notification to a news organization, then it has to serve EJ populations. That's any EJ population, not just those lacking English language proficiency. And also when you get to the public notice of the final CSO plan, and it has to go in the public notice has to be in a publication that serves EJ populations, that also would be any EJ population. But the trigger for translation is only this lacking English language proficiency.
Okay, hopefully that answered that question. Phil, if you have a follow-up, raise your hand or add it to the chat, please. Luchika and then Wendy.
I have a follow-up for John for the estimated volume. If the CSO stopped before we send the initial notification, can we include the sort of the metered so the actual volume instead of the estimated, or do we have to include both? That estimated based on the past 3 years of data always needs to be there.
Yeah, that's a good question. We'll run that one by OGC just to make sure that the language and the regulations, if it holds you to that estimated volume, or if you'd be able to post actual. So we'll put that in the FAQ document, and we can run that by the OGC. Wendy?
Sure. So I had put some questions in the chat, but they're like way up the list. So I'll just reiterate. In section 5, and I'm sorry, I don't know what page it's on, but it talks about a compilation of discharge data. But there's some things in there. I'm not sure what they keep going.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. And that was kind of a slug of questions on frequency.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll clear those up in the FAQ document, just so we can kind of get that all in one place and make sure everyone's on the same page.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, no, that's a good question. And like I said, there's some areas that it's helpful getting the feedback now, so we can kind of get these clarified at the same point in time for everyone. Like I said, send those along. I think my email's around somewhere. So if anything pops
and just for everyone else, I had asked what does if applicable mean? I didn't know frequency was in there. I couldn't figure what that referred to. Yeah.
Yeah. So
and,
yes.
And whether it specifically needed a monthly sort of list, or whether we could just have like a running list from whenever we start and just keep adding to it.
Yeah, and I think it's important that for the tools that you currently are using, I know I've seen other CSO communities that have kind of a running Excel on their website is, in this phase, I think it's important to show what tools you're currently utilizing and how they're being used, and trying to match that to the requirements of the regulation. So I think that, use some of the tools, or use the tools that you have or are currently using that are compiling data, and we'll work from there.
Okay.
The if applicable is if for whatever reason discharger didn't have 3 calendar years of data, then they
Okay.
then if they only have 2, then they would only post 2, because the CSO permittees all have different requirements right now in their NPDES permits, where some are, on their DMRs are reporting the volume of each event every month. Some haven't yet been required to do that. So in the event that they didn't have this 3 years worth of data, that's when they wouldn't have to.
Okay, thank you. And my next question had to do with the section that says to provide links to websites providing information on closure or advisory status of shellfish growing areas. And I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know what section this is in. Shellfish growing areas, bathing beaches, or other water resources areas potentially affected. So I know what a shellfish growing area is, and I have an idea of who would have, what the website would be. And I know about bathing beaches too, but I wasn't sure what other water resources areas included and who might have a website with information about them.
So Wendy, it's Leldon. So I think what we're talking about there are other public access points such as boat ramps or fishing piers and such. Those could be under either municipal control, or they could be under state facility control. We've been talking to some of the state, the state agencies and to kind of coordinate where those locations are. They're in proximity to these CSO discharges. And then I'd also just mention that they could also be private, recreational facilities that were open to the public. So we had that question last week. I've given that a little bit of thought. We've done a little bit of research on what those might be and so on. And I think we can respond to that a little more fully when we have completed our discussions with the agencies, and when our group reconvenes tomorrow. We'll be able to follow up on some of the questions we've not maybe answered fully, today or last week.
Right,
And
thanks.
I think we
know.
would acknowledge that those falling into this other water resource areas may not have a website where you can find closure information. And if they don't, then that's fine. You don't have to provide a link to it. But if they do.
And it can be hard to know where to draw the line. When we were trying to figure out where to put the signs along the Alewife Brook and Mystic River, my husband is an avid angler, and I asked him, where do people fish? And he said, wherever they can get to the water.
Yeah.
Basically, is a fishing area. But, we can't put signs at all those places.
Right.
And my last question was on the template was on potentially affected bathing beaches. If you can provide a list of bathing beaches or a place we could look up. I guess it's kind of related to the previous question. Does that include town beaches, and does it include private beaches?
Yeah, John reminded me this morning we were going to reach out to Department of Public Health, see if we can identify a list of those bathing beaches, and maybe use that. So we are in the process of researching that as well.
Yeah, I think it may be defined in their regulations, so we probably would link it to that.
Yeah,
I think
You mean there's a list in the regulations?
No, I don't know that there's a list in the regulations, but it has to meet the definition in the regulations to be considered.
I'm saying that
but
I don't
we will
want to
also
go
see if there is
walk along
actually
the
a list that
shoreline and
exists
decide whether
somewhere.
it meets the regulation. I wanted to know where the beaches are.
Right, and we will see if there is a list that exists.
Okay.
But I think we can point out that there's no obligation for signage at private access points. The bathing regulations have they have public beaches, and they actually have a defined class of semi-public. So we're going to get engaged in discussions with them on that. But it would be great if they had a listing. The group that we talked to, Lilith and I talked to, had a data layer of access points for fishing and boating access for the DCR facility. So we're trying to compile this stuff and, make it available to everybody. So it's not, it should not be a mystery as to where public access points are.
Yeah, and I will say that, in the evolution of the development of the regs, what we were really trying to get at here was, we have, there's some language about recommending people avoid contact for 48 hours after a rainstorm. And what we were also acknowledging was that, there are instances where, and with some frequency, that there are discharges from CSOs, but there is not necessarily an impact to a bathing beach, to a shellfish growing area, and that those entities that are responsible for those other types of water resources may be posting their own information about whether those areas are open or closed. And we wanted to, we're trying to get that website information available so that people can make more informed decisions about, well, gosh, it says there's a CSO discharge, but I want to know if this beach is open before I pack the kids and get in the car. And, before I throw my gear in the car and go shell fishing. So we're trying to, the purpose really there in part was to avoid conflict with others who may be doing, rigorous evaluation of their water quality or the safety of waters, and try to avoid that conflict. Okay, are there other questions on the template?
There was another one in the chat about DEP providing the languages for each town to be translated to.
I'm sorry, John, where is that? Can you, or if you could just read the question, I'm looking for it.
Yep.
I'll read it.
It would be much easier if you provided a list of communities and language. The map is very hard to use. Have to click every single shaded area.
Let us talk about that. That might be something we could do. So let us take that under advisement. See if there's any pitfalls I haven't thought about here. And are there other questions on the templates? And when we're done with template questions, what I'd like to do is then go back to the top of the chat, answer questions that we can that have been entered into the chat. And I'd like to start at the top just for out of respect for the people who have been patiently waiting to get answers to those questions. So last call on questions on the template itself. All right, thanks. So returning to the top of the chat, Dennis Lowe asked or commented that he's talked to a few newspaper outlets and there's confusion of where the notifications should go. There have been a few that just said just to send it to the news department. Does MassDEP have any recommendation to what portion or department of the newspaper the notification should be sent to? I don't believe we do. I think that's going to vary from newspaper to newspaper depending upon its size and so forth. Given that, the permittee is in that municipality, maybe a little closer to that source than we are, sort of in a statewide fashion, you might just reach out, try to find somebody to have that conversation with, and see where, if you can, get further instruction from them about where to send that notification. DP folks, anybody else have a comment or on what I just said?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. I agree with what you said, and I also had just noticed a similar question further down that we maybe cover at the same time while we're on that topic, or a comment really. Someone had said that they had contacted 3 newspapers about this, and the only one that got back to them wanted them to pay for a legal ad. And I want to just reiterate that we do not expect permittees to pay to post a legal ad. If that's the only way that the newspaper is going to post something, that's okay. Like, you're only required to notify them. If they choose to make that into a news story, they can. If they don't do anything with it, that's not your fault. So we do not expect anyone to pay to place legal ads. And there is no obligation for the newspaper to do anything with it. And if they don't, you are not at fault or held liable in any way.
And just be aware that, that the requirement for notification to the media outlets was a statutory requirement. So continuing on, is there an email address for Mass Department of Public Health that should be sending the notifications to? Tried this particular DPH email address and it gets bounced back. I've gotten responses from all the agencies. We should be able to publish that contact list fairly soon, and we'd be able to provide you with where those notifications should go. And then Wendy has helpfully provided a link to boards of health for contacts of boards of health in each municipality that's available from the Mass Health Officers Association. So thank you for that, Wendy. Does MassDEP have a list or point me in the right direction where I can find out where communities get their drinking water from?
Well, on Mass Mapper, Weldon, on the Mass GIS system, which is an online system, they have data layers for groundwater and surface water sources. So they should be available on that platform.
Okay, and for those, so thanks for that, Kevin. Since this would pertain to those discharges to surface waters, is there an identification of the location of the outfall on those layers, or do you happen to know?
I think that's kept confidential, the exact location of the intake.
Yeah, so thank you. Certain of that information is kind of protected for security reasons. So I don't know how specific you would be able to get in terms of the locations exactly of intake point.
But I don't know that they need to know the exact intake location. They just need to know the water body. And they do need to know that in order to determine whether they need to notify downstream drinking water sources. But
Okay.
I'm assuming what Kevin was referring to would allow that. So we can look at that and respond in the FAQ and include a link if applicable.
Thanks, Susie. All right. Questions on a compilation of discharge data for each public advisory notification event is due by the 15th of the next month. What does, if applicable, mean?
We covered these already.
Yeah, we did, okay.
Yeah, these, I think all of these from Wendy we covered.
Okay, good. Yeah. We answered Amy's question.
We answered this question from Andrew already.
Okay. Siobhan says it'd be great if our city web page could link to our web page. Maybe some security issues there, and we can consider that as we're developing our database. We could have a CSO website that links to DP. Does the statute require the MassDEP website be updated in the same time frame?
We answered that.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, sorry. In Betsy adds to the discussion we had about automation. Are the public health warnings in addition to the emails? We answered that, right? And do we answer this question yet? I know we talked about it before the meeting. Does the public advisory notice have to be provided in both text and email format?
We didn't answer this
Yeah,
today, and we're making sure we get the correct answer from
to that.
our attorneys before we answer that.
Right.
So it'll be in the FAQ.
Yeah. We talked about the timing, that there's not a time frame for the boards of health to post. When do we expect the preliminary CSO plan template to be finalized? I'd like to start filling it out as soon as possible to meet the May 1st deadline. I think we are thinking within a couple of weeks. I think we've committed internally within our working group that we can do that by early part of next week. I think it's going to need some review, sort of up our chain of command. Some folks in our chain of command have expressed an interest in seeing that, so that will likely take a few more days. So I'm estimating within the next couple of weeks. In addition, we have an SSO permittee training session that's scheduled for February 3rd. Most of the information in the CSO template is really not relevant to those folks. The SSO one is much simpler. And so we would expect to follow up with an SSO template shortly after that February 3rd training session. Okay, so Phil asks, on the downstream water supplier impact, is it only for direct intake from the water receiving the discharge, or do we consider a zone 1 or zone 2 of a well that encompasses the impacted water to be a downstream water supplier? I think I'd want to give that question a little more thought. So I'm assuming, Phil, that you're kind of identifying where a stream or river that's just where a discharge occurs to a stream or river that then passes through the zone A or zone 1 or zone 2.
Yeah, that's what I have in mind, Weldon. I understand, like on the Merrimack, you've got water suppliers withdrawing directly from the river.
Right.
But if you're on the Blackstone River, I don't think there's anyone drawing water directly from the Blackstone, but there may be a water supply well that's close enough to the river that it's in the zone 1. The river's in the zone 1 of the well, or certainly in the zone 2. But then you're going through 100 feet of gravel or whatever, right, before you get
right
into the well. So
yeah, there's a bunch of questions tied up in that. Is there actually a connection to the water body itself? Is right there induced infiltration?
Correct.
It passes through soil before it would get to the well screen, and then treatment will be provided afterwards. So that's a complicated question.
That's why I asked it. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, it looks like we're at the end of the questions in the chat that we can answer. Are there
one hand raised?
Oh, sorry, Luchika? And Wendy as well.
I think Wendy was first, so I'll give it to her.
Oh, no, I just had a quick thing on Amy's question about text and email. It may be possible to send emails to a text number at least in certain systems, but I don't. So that, but the DEP should still look into that question and get the answer. But there may be a way to get around it if people require text, but whatever system you're using only sends out emails.
My question was related to the next training session, the SSO training session. And I understand this is meant for communities that do not have combined sewers and CSOs, but wanted to, I guess, get some input on whether that would be beneficial for the CSOs communities to attend as well.
I think my answer would be no. I think that the material that we have covered today is much more expansive than what you're going to hear at that training session. I don't can't think of a reason why you would need to if you're in a community, that has a CSO. I can't think of a reason why you'd need to attend. If any of my DP colleagues have a different view, let me know.
I agree. I don't think you would gain anything additionally from attending, but at the same time, you're welcome to if you want to.
Yeah, I mean,
we won't tell you you can't.
The presentation should flow pretty closely to what was presented last week, just minus the CSO requirements. There's less signage requirements, less event requirements, so discovery is a little bit different, but it's the same information that was covered last week, just minus the CSO components. So it would be up to you whether you wanted to attend. I don't foresee any new information being covered.
And I'd add that session is a much larger group of permittees. So it will be hard to be as interactive as we've been here just because of the sheer number of people who are likely to attend. And Betsy has offered some helpful information in the chat as well about the required language. If it's very long, a text may not be able to accommodate it, but folks may prefer to receive text. They currently provide, they being the MWRA, provide a summary in text with a link to get the longer, more detailed information. So that might be a workaround as well.
Leildon?
Yes.
I thought that wasn't going to be allowed. I thought it had to be in the pub. And this is Amy, by the way, Amy Schofield. I asked the question about the text versus the email, because right now we're set up to issue emails and the capability, we had to even ask about text being possible. But if you were to post the entire public notification of the required language, as I read it, it was my understanding that all of it has to be in the text or the email, that there's a lot of characters, and then Boston Water and Sewer presumably would have to translate to a number of different languages. So we're talking a lot of characters, and if they're required to put into text, my understanding is there's a limit on text. So if you go over the number of characters in a text, it produces another email, another text, and then the recipient could be charged again and again. So you're talking a lot of characters potentially. So if there's some way, you're saying my original idea was refer back to the website because you could put text up there. So anyway, that's the dilemma we're in. It's just producing, if it's texts are going to be required, they're just going to be potentially very, very long.
So Amy, I agree with you that for most of the information, I don't think you could just put a link. I think if it is a text, it has to have the full information, with the exception of the translation, because it does say provide access to, translate, or be translated or provide access to. So the translation does not have to be in the text message itself. It could be a link to provide the translation. And I understand that even the just English, all of the information is a lot of characters already.
Oh, that is what I wanted. That's exactly what I wanted to. That's way better. So,
so that on the translation, I think I feel confident in that answer. But we want to make sure we provide the, we don't tell you wrong information on whether email and text is required as options, but that we will get back to folks with that answer as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Okay, so are there any other questions before we sort of wrap up with next steps? Great. Okay, good. I think we need to go back and do some more of our own homework, respond to some of these questions, complete our FAQ, provide you, I went over this list in the beginning, but just to mention it again, we're talking with those agencies. We're going to finalize the agency contact list. We will have updates eventually on the database. I wouldn't expect that in the near term. We're working on the translation needs. That will be as part of the FAQ document. We are going to provide signage templates. Don't have an estimate on timing on that quite yet. And the contact list, I think we'll be able to provide in the near term. it's a little challenging to be able to communicate with everybody. Is email the best way? Do folks think we need another session? We were contemplating the possibility of another session when we get to the development of the final CSO notification plan template. I just wanted to hear what people's thoughts were.
There seems to be, I'll jump in. There seems to be an ongoing problem with people not necessarily getting all the information that you're sending out, all the updates to the meeting and so forth. And I wonder if it makes sense to set up some kind of listserv that people can, if you have the capability to do that, so people can know that they're on the list and they can sign up for the list, and I don't know, just to make sure that everybody, even if they're not able to attend the meeting, they're still getting the information.
Right. So I thank you, Wendy. Yeah, I'm aware of those problems. I've spent a lot of time this week trying to solve some of those contact problems. It appears that not all of them are on DEP's end. I've certainly added people to the list to receive the invitations and emails, and then became aware that they hadn't received it. I think some of those might be security features. Not quite sure what's going on there.
Lou, we can check it because Wendy's been helping us too. So what we found out on our side is one of your servers is fine, but one of your servers does something and it triggers our security system. And what our IT is saying is it's something on a DEP server. We're trying to get some more information as well.
Huh. Okay, thanks, Charlie.
You got it.
Yeah, Lilden, this is Amy again. I work with Charlie, but we'll send you out, whatever we can find out from our IT, because I want to get to the bottom of this, because there's other places we don't get stuff from too. And if it's something that be changed on, it may be something security wise that you can't change, but hopefully if it's something that you can change, it would resolve a problem for a lot of people.
Right. Yeah.
I just found it was interesting is one server as opposed to another one. We cannot figure, I have no clue how this stuff works.
Yeah, well, okay. So Amy and I spent a fair bit of time emailing each other, trying to solve some of this. I'll see if I can inquire about whether it's our server maybe triggering something. But I do like the idea if there's a different way to do this more easily, listserv. Certainly would save me personally some headaches and time.
Before you start digging in, do you want to wait to see what our IT department says so that way we can leave guide? That way you're not running around crazy too. I
appreciate it, Charlie. If you think you can do that in the near term, sure. I'd love for you to do that. Just email me and then I can take it from there.
You got it.
Thank you. All right.
I mean, we could ask wwhether anyone else is having trouble besides BWSC, but if they aren't, they aren't necessarily on this call. So why aren't the people coming to my party, right?
Right. Yeah. I think there have been some others. Hopefully we've solved some of those. Okay, so the other thing to remember is that this website, at DEP's website is constantly being updated with information. And so you can certainly check back there if you have questions about whether something has been posted yet and so forth. I will try and let you know through some other forum, but feel free to check our website. It's very much a work in progress, and the expectation is that will continue to be a location where you can go for updated information on this law, regs, and all the related items. So, unless there's anything else, I'd like to thank everybody for joining. I really appreciate your time and your thoughtful input. I appreciate your attendance and help. We are trying, like you, to make sure that we are compliant, as are you, and give you the tools that you need to have to be able to comply. You're welcome to reach out to me individually if you have a question, either by phone or by email, and we will get back to you. And unless there's anything else, wish everybody well, and we will be in touch. Thank you.